Jesus is alive. Empty cross and empty grave, life eternal, you have won the day. Shout it out, Jesus is alive. Yes, he's alive. And oh, happy day, you washed my sin away. Oh, happy day, I'll never be the same. Oh no, forever I am changed. When I stand in that place, free at last, meeting face to face, I am yours, Jesus, you are mine. When there's joy and perfect peace, illicit pain finally will cease. Celebrate, Jesus is alive. Yes, he's alive. And oh, happy day, you washed my sin away. And oh, happy day, I'll never be the same. Oh no, forever I am changed. And oh, what a glorious day, what a glorious way that you have saved me. And oh, what a glorious day, what a glorious name. Yeah. And oh, happy day, you washed my sin away. And oh, happy day, I'll never be the same. Oh, happy day, you washed my sin away. And oh, happy day, I'll never be the same. Oh no, forever I am changed. What a glorious day.
It's kind of funny. Neil always asks me to pray about something, and I'd already had some things on my heart that I was hoping I would get to share. So, like when his call came, I was like, "Yes." He's like, "Well, I want you to pray about it." I was like, "I've been praying about it. This is like an answer to prayer right now." So, if you don't mind, some of the things that I'm going to try to go over today are a little bit emotional, and I know that's unusual for me. But I'm asking that if you'll allow me to, let's pray to begin with, so maybe I can get rid of some of that nervousness that I have right now. So, Heavenly Father, I come to you right now asking that your words come out today, not mine. I pray that you'll help me with the things that I feel like you want me to say. Help them be concise. Help them to be legible. And help them to be a blessing, because that's really what we're trying to do here, is bless each other. And I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. I would like to, when Will sent me a message saying, "What are you speaking on?" it kind of put me on the spot, because it's kind of like I've just been thinking all week, and for 2 or 3 weeks in a row here, I've been thinking about how this church, community, my family, have been very supportive and loving, and so it's kind of like, so I sent him something, and I see that he had to adjust it because the grammar was probably really incorrect, but it's, how the community has saved me from myself. And I'd really like to start off, we're going to start off reading some scriptures, starting with shepherds and end with surfers. So if y'all bear with me, hopefully we'll make something of it in the middle here. I'd like to read John 10, verses 1 through 18, so bear with me. Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that entereth not by the door into the sheepfold, but climbeth up some other way, the same is a thief and a robber. But he that entereth by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the portal open, and the sheep hear his voice. He calleth his sheep by name, and leadeth them out. And when he putteth forth his own sheep, he goeth before them, much like Elijah was talking about, he walks before them. The sheep follow him, and they know his voice. And a stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, but they know not the voice of strangers. This parable spake Jesus unto them, but they understood not the things of which he would spake unto them. Then Jesus said unto them again, and I like the fact that he said it again, because a lot of times we need it again and again and again. Yes. Verily, verily, I say unto you, I am the door of the sheep, and all that ever come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. I am the door. By me, if any man enter, shall be saved, and shall go in and out and find pasture. The thief cometh not, but for to steal, and to kill, and to destroy. I come that they might have life, and have life more abundantly. I'm grateful for that as well. I am the good shepherd, and the good shepherd giveth his life for his sheep. But he that is a hireling, and not the shepherd, whose own sheep are not, seeth the wolf coming, and leaveth the sheep, and fleeth. And the wolf catcheth them, and scattereth the sheep. A hireling fleeth, but because he is a hireling, and careth not for the sheep. I am the good shepherd, and know my sheep, and am known by my sheep. As the Father knoweth me, even so I the Father. And because I lay down my life for the sheep. And this verse 16 I'm very happy about as well. And other sheep have which are not of this fold, them also must I bring. And they shall hear my voice, and there shall be one fold and one shepherd. Therefore doth my Father love me, because I lay down my life, that I might take it again. No man taketh it from me, but I lay it down myself. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it back again. This commandment I have received of my Father. Now, I read that because as it's a fairly long thing, but I think hopefully we can tie it all together. A few bullet points from that is the shepherd knows his sheep by name, just like our Lord knows us by name. Yeah. The sheep know his voice. The shepherd would lay down his life for the sheep. Only robbers and thieves come, and the sheep flee from them. A hireling doesn't care about the sheep and the fact that other sheep are welcome into the fold. John is a book of faith, so if anyone has been struggling with that, I would suggest that you read John. It just reaffirms things, and this is helpful for me. I thought when I would go back and try to just give my testimony a little bit. I was born into a family that was very loving. My dad, of course, is a pastor and been called to preach since he was like 16 and has never looked back. So that's a great legacy, but sometimes perhaps I felt like I fell short of that and then beat myself up because of that. And so like when times would come, I would always take the easy way out and blame it on inconsistencies with other pastors, but I could never really do that with my dad because my dad never asked for a raise. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I mean, it's like he was in it for the service of the master. And I'm a little more selfish and never really lived that way. So, I don't know, it's just almost like too big of a legacy to try to live up to. So like, I was saved in high school. I asked the Lord into my heart and was on fire for a while. You know, believe it or not, I was leading singing and all that kind of stuff. And then, not good at it, but I did. And then, you know, like I was talking about as far as inconsistency and maybe some pastors that preached really, really hard against things and then come to find out they were actually doing the things that they were preaching against. And so that made it very easy for me to cop out and say, well, you know, other than my dad, everything else is a joke. And so I lived a life that was more about working hard and playing hard and just really doing my own thing and never really listening to that inner voice that was saying, that's wrong, don't do that, you know better than that. I just disregarded that and made it the excuse that other than my dad, all the others are fakes. You know, because my dad had lived it, and I knew that he sacrificed, but I could see where a lot of other ones weren't. And I continued that lifestyle for a long time. Even after Fawn and I were married, I concentrated on trying to be a good provider. I tried to love my kids, but I didn't set a great example for them. We didn't have devotions. We didn't pray at the table like we knew we should have. We didn't have devotions at night or during the time frame. And sometimes, you know, I regret that because both of my children now are a little skeptical of that, so we pray about that all the time for them. I think, you know, that's just what it is. I'm being honest, guys, so that's why I'm saying it's emotional for me. So at the whole time, just like the shepherd, and the sheep know the shepherd's voice, right? They may wander off, see some greener grass, and they wander off, but they hear his voice, they recognize his voice. Do they answer it all the time? No, sometimes he has to go and get them and bring them back. So, speaking of community, I want to kind of get a definition of community. That way we are all on the same page as far as a group of people living in the same place or having a particular characteristic in common. And I think that's the one I'm kind of clinging to because in my lifetime, my community, other than this church, has been my family and friends and things of that nature. So I would say the characteristic we have in common is knowing that Christ died on the cross for us and is our salvation. We just need to accept it and live by it. And so my community, my mom and dad, were praying for me when they knew I was out of the will of God. They didn't really preach to me. I was old enough, I'd made my own decisions. And so that prayer was always behind me. And like the sheep who's wandered off the path, I recognized the voice, but I didn't come back. Then we're going to fast forward a little bit more. I went to an activity with my wife and my son at Davidson Academy, and there's this guy sitting toward the front, and he's giving a little kid a hard time about how Vanderbilt's so much better than the University of Tennessee, and it was Wilford. And I was with Darby, and I was like, who's that guy? He's like, well, that's Jada's granddad. I was like, man, he's giving that little kid a hard time. And he's like, yeah, he does that all the time. I was like, man, I like that. You know, that's what I want to be like when I'm 70 years old. I want to be able to like sit next to a kid and still harass him, and it's going to be good, you know? And so that's how I got to know Wilford that night. I just went down and sat next to him, and we were talking baseball, and we were talking everything, and then all of a sudden, like, almost like a U-turn, the conversation went from baseball and sports to Jesus. And I didn't want to hear it. You know, I didn't come to talk to him about religion. I came to talk to him because he was an old guy being mean to a little kid. That's what I wanted to be about. I didn't want anything to do with religion at that point. And he was like, dude, you gotta, you know, Jesus is so good. And he said all the things I already knew and heard and in my heart really believed, but had pushed it so far back that I didn't want to deal with it anymore. And so he set the seed a little bit. And then I think there was another activity, and I talked to him, and we were talking, and then for some reason the conversation once again turned to, you know, he shared his life where he was not living for the Lord. He grew up in a family that was, you know, very much like my background. And then at one point he was preaching in a biker bar instead of drinking. And you know, it was just, once again, it was a situation I didn't really plan on having, but that seed was planted once again. And so I remember he invited me to church, and I didn't want to go. And so I went, and of course, much like my brother said the first time he was here, you know, you're in and you're picking the sermon apart because your dad could do it so much better, or you know, you figure even though you're not very religious, you could have done it better, you know. But I went in with that attitude, but I didn't come out that way. And that was the first time I'd heard the song, God won't give up on you, you know. So, and I've talked about that before. So, between Wilford being, at that time he didn't know it, but he was becoming a big part of my community, and thus his family, you know, was becoming a part of my community. And then, you know, Sherry is relentless in loving people and having an open house, and just constantly, you know, texting you and checking on you and making sure that you know that you're loved. And she did that through my wife. You know, my wife has made friends here, and it's one of those things that we needed, and it began to save us. And I hope I'm making some sense. I mean, there's a lot of testimonies that I've heard in here that I may have not said anything to the people when they gave them, because I had to let it really marinate. It was so powerful that it was overwhelming. I think Whitney's testimony, when she gave her testimony, I was just really, for 2 or 3 days, that's all I could think about. How honest it was and how raw it was. And I think about Ron's wife, Sherry, when she gave her testimony, the same thing. It was so real and so heartwarming that they felt so comfortable in here, in this community, that they could share things that you would never really do anywhere else. At least I never would. I mean, if you had looked at, I mean, people who know me from back in the day, they would die seeing me doing what I'm doing right now. You know, so, and I think, quite honestly, one of the bravest things, and one of the things that is helping me is, I know, Melanie, the fact that you're leaving and going somewhere when you know your parents are as old as they are, and you mentioned that up here, I never forgot that. I mean, that's just good stuff. I mean, it really is. It's kind of stuff that makes you want to be a part of a community, and you want to contribute, at least I do, to that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, this is where I get to the Baptist part, and Sue will really understand this, because a good Baptist story always has to have the cloud of death over it. If it doesn't have some kind of death remark, it's not a good Baptist story. Am I right, Sue? Okay. Well, as you guys know, Costa Rica, I went swimming and got sucked out by a riptide, and I've been burnt and med-flighted to Vanderbilt, and I've had a motorcycle wreck, and I've had third-degree burn from sunburn and all these different crazy, idiotic things that I've done. But I've never been as scared of losing my life as I was in that 10 minutes of being out there. And so, what I'm going to try to talk about for the next minute or two is how that experience really helped me refocus on some things that I hope will be a blessing and a help to some people here who might be struggling with some of the same things. But while I was out there, it happened so quickly, and I became so exhausted so fast that I literally thought I was dying. I mean, I had realized I've waited too late to try to call for help, because I was trying to do it on my own. I was trying to swim back in, and I became very exhausted. I even remembered swim parallel with the beach until you can find a spot to come in. And I had swam, but I was exhausted. I could not do anything else. And I refused to pray, because I hadn't prayed before I'd gone swimming. I hadn't prayed during that trip. I didn't pray when we got on the plane. And I selfishly thought that I wasn't worthy of praying. I shouldn't ask God in an emergency situation for his help. After talking with some friends, that was my fault. Again, that's not what the Lord would want. But then, when I got back, and I was wondering, what is my purpose here on this earth? And I'm sure we've all asked that at some point or another, when we hit middle age or we go to a funeral of a friend. We all ask those questions. What is my purpose here on earth? And then I ask, why did God save me? And I don't know if I was still in shock from all of the things, but I thought, well, I'll just go and I'll visit some people and, it'll get better. But then I went and saw Justin, and he was in worse shape than I'd ever seen him before. I mean, he didn't recognize me. He didn't recognize anybody in the room. And to me at that time, it was very depressing. So then we go to see Nan, and Nan had made the decision that she didn't want anything done, and she was ready to go home. That was a dark weekend for me. And it was a selfish weekend, as I look at it now, because there's so many people in this community and congregation who have been through so much worse things that it's to look back on it now, I feel a little bit embarrassed, but at the same time, I had to come through that. So, I'm sure my wife shared with Sherry, who turned around and shared with Neil. Kevin's not at church, and he never doesn't bring coffee to church. He's really kind of crazy about that. He wants it here on a certain time, and I do. But that day, I didn't want to leave the house. I don't know. I'd hit kind of an emotional rock bottom, and I didn't know how to dig out of it. And I wasn't sure I wanted to dig out of it because I kind of knew what needed to be done. I just didn't want to take the steps to do it. So, like, Neil called that night after church, just checking, and I was like, yeah, everything's great, just, a little sleepy, not feeling well. And that was the end of it. Well, like a good community, he called me the next day and said, can we do lunch? And I was like, yes, sir, we can do that. And so I got with Neil and just told him the whole story, because I had really kind of kept it to myself. I hadn't talked to my parents about it. It was a real crazy time. And then, I shared with him my doubts and my fears and the whole story about everything. And guess what? He didn't have the answer. Neil Morris didn't have the answer that was going to cure what I was going through. But what he did do is he shared some of his experiences. He told me to dig into the Word more, to pray harder, and that he would be praying for me. Now, am I going to be the Christian that my dad has been? No. I'm not going to be the next Billy Graham. I'm not going to be any of those things. But what I can be, and what I want to be, and this is what's so amazing and I'm grateful for, is that even though I have lived a life that's been very selfish and very much my own will, he's willing to work through me even still. Yes. And he told me, because, as I was discouraged and down on myself, Neil told me that I was needed in this congregation. He said, you're needed for just who you are, your humor, even though I'm sure he meant that it can be a little bit rough sometimes, but he didn't say that at the time. And that I visit people in the hospital, because Fawn and I spent so much time in the hospital when our daughter was in there that we kind of understand what people are going through when they're there for extended times. And I may add this too, because the Zachary family has been through so much with Justin, but if you talk to April, it's always positive. Even when the news is as bad as it can be, it's positive coming from her voice. And she has that laugh that we all know. And even it's a nervous laugh, it's there. It's not a complaining, it's not a drudgery. It is something that the outside world can look at that and say, man, if they're going through that and can still laugh and have joy inside, I want to be a part of that, and I want a piece of that. And I hope that I can be that for someone like she has been for me. Even though I go to visit them thinking I'm going to help them, it always ends up me leaving with a blessing. So, in my conclusion, if you'll put the picture up for me. All right. If I can make it through this, I can make it through anything. All right? As I'm bobbing up and down, gasping for breath, I can't see the shoreline. All I can see is just waves. And I'm really giving up. And then I see my son jumping, waving his hands, jumping and hollering. And I think to myself, I don't want to die in front of my son. Okay? So, as he's jumping and hollering, these guys here, especially the guy on the right-hand side, was there surfing, and he is, believe it or not, a guy out of Las Vegas, and his job is a paramedic in the water division of Las Vegas. All right, the guy to the left, his grandmother has lived in Costa Rica for the last 25 years, and for the last 21 years, he's come down there this same time of year and surfed. And he is a lifeguard in Washington, D.C. Okay? So my son's jumping up and down, screaming and hollering to encourage me not to give up, but also to make awareness of what's going on. And so the guy on the right comes out first, and when I see him get close, then I start screaming, I need help. I'm about to go down. I can't do anymore. And so he puts me on the board and tries to paddle in, but the current is so bad, still pulling. He's paddling for like 5 minutes. It seemed like 5 minutes. It could have been 2 minutes, but it was where he got exhausted as well and couldn't do it. So the other guy saw that we were struggling, and he came out and tied his line to my wrist, and we went parallel with the waves, and then a jet ski came and took me, and finally took me into shore, and then they, of course, surfed in. And I didn't see him again for like 4 or 5 days, and then got a picture with him right before I left. But I think there's a great analogy here that we can hopefully get a grasp on. It's just like my son was jumping up and down, basically helping save me. Our Savior is jumping up and down, wanting us. So if you're drowning in depression, or you're drowning in debt, or you're drowning in whatever it may be, addiction or whatever, if you look toward the Son who's jumping up and down, calling you by name, because he knows your name, he'll send somebody to help you. I mean, I know that's really a Baptist ending, but I mean, that is the way I feel about this whole thing. I mean, it really was. My community helped save me, not just literally, but they have helped save me from just going off the deep end with just self-hate and self-doubt. So I would love to be able to do that for other people. I mean, I feel that sometimes I harass people, and I give the twins a hard time, and I give Zachary a hard time, and those guys. But they are the future, and they need to know that I love them, and I would probably do anything for them if it was within my power. So, yeah, I think that's it. So thank you for your time.
I was really inspired by Kevin's words. Nowadays, maybe the reason why, Kevin, you'll never be a Billy Graham or even like your father along those lines is because as God works and the things around us continually change, he continually changes the way he interacts with people. So who knows? You never really know. You know, the fact is, if you ever get to the point where you really feel worthy to pray, you really need to pray. Because if you're out there going down and you're like, God, you owe me. Come on now. You know I've been praying every day.
Right.
Something's wrong. It doesn't seem to be that somehow we just get to this point that God is responding because we're just worthy in some way, as much as we try to do. But through the experiences, like Kevin was saying, a lot of times it's through life experiences that we discover something we didn't really, maybe we knew, like in our heart somewhere, but we never really were able to put it into words where we could really think on it and examine it. And so I've been thinking about this since Sharon passed. You know, I was sitting there. I got to see her several times before the week before she passed, and I was sitting there in the service observing what was going on, and I was actually thinking about what was going on and kind of examining it, like trying to understand it, because it was a little unique in the way that it went down. But I thought of Sharon. I've not been real close to Sharon my whole life, even though our families have been, have interacted back to Wilford's, grandparents, and my grandparents were extremely good friends, as Wilford's mentioned. But I have been around her enough to know through the years that not everything really went her way. She didn't live in wealth. Wilford was a hard worker, and to provide and things, but she didn't have just a cushy life. She had challenges in her life. Not everything that she went through in life was good or fair. Not going through any of those things, but like anybody in life, that just happens. But I thought of, as I was thinking about that, I was looking at the family and the way that the family was able to interact in the funeral was it was different, okay? But it's not a genetic thing. There's a purpose for why things happen the way they do. They say in life that it's good that we don't know some things, and it's important that we do know other things. Like, it's important to know that you've got a place to sleep, or that you're gonna go to work tomorrow, or get a paycheck. But for most people, it's good that you just don't know when you're gonna die. You know you're gonna die, but it's better to not know. If somebody could tell you, okay, you're gonna live to 72, and on January 3rd, you're going down. That's it, okay? Between now and January 3rd, and when you're 72, you'd be struggling with that, or maybe it's quicker. Maybe it's not that long, or who knows how long anybody has. The worst, probably the most traumatic thing is to receive a death sentence. Somebody say, look, this is it, it's up. And basically with Sharon, that's what happened to her. She got a death sentence. They told her, when this event happens, you've got 10 days to 2 weeks to live. And I thought, as I watched her, and I know there was a part of her that was struggling with that. I mean, it just wouldn't be, there would be something very unusual for a person to not struggle with that. I think anybody would. But yet, even in the midst of that, she was able to focus on the things that were of value and the things that were good. And probably in my experience of watching that, she gave her family a tremendous gift. Because what she was going through, she was able to kind of separate that and get the most out of it. You talk about wanting to get the most out of life in general. She got the most out of that last 10 days. It was very, very special to see her interacting with her family and her positiveness and her comfort of them. And I asked her I got to talk to her just for a few minutes alone. I think I started to ask her about when she was gone. And so Sherry was there, and she kind of walked out. She realized I was just asking her. I was like, well, what do you want me? What would you want me to convey to your family? Because she'd asked me to say something at the funeral. And I said, is there anything you want to say to them? And she said, no, I've said it. I've said it all. And at the time I was thinking about that, I was like, wow, that is so cool. And so I'm sitting there during this funeral, and then even afterwards, between that point, I'm trying to kind of make this stuff make sense to me. I'm just kind of analytical that way, trying to understand, how does this work? And I realized that you don't get to your last 10 days and turn this on. This is the culmination of living a life that, Kevin, this must be catchy up here, this whole emotional thing. But this is like, she was only able to do this because this is the way she lived life before she knew what the end was going to be. She lived a life that, with whatever the challenges were and the disappointments and failures, whatever those things were, she was always able to focus on the good and enjoy the good that was in that. And in doing so, that's the only reason I'm convinced that her family could even participate in something along that line, because she set that example to them. Her last 10 days, in many ways, were a celebration, even though they knew disappointment would come and they would miss her tremendously in those things. But that they were feeling and experiencing there in that funeral, I'm sure that was something that was still had been imparted to them. That was an energy that they had received through that were helping them to get through those things. So I thought about my own life. I reflected on my own life along that line, Kevin, or anybody else. I don't know quite you, Kevin, sorry. But I reflect on that on my own, and I thought, I was thinking about how it says that, we recite the 23rd Psalm, and I think about this one verse in there about how he makes a table in the presence of mine enemies. And this is why I was thinking of you, Kevin, not that you're my enemy. But we have a common enemy. Like, our worst enemy, Kevin, is ourselves. If there's anybody that would challenge me more, there isn't anybody that challenges me more that I have a more difficult time with than just me personally. That is the guy I struggle with the most. And in that, I think I probably qualify. That in the midst of my enemies includes me. That God puts these good things. He gives us these good things for us to focus on. But a lot of times it's not when everything is just running smoothly and when there's no problems or no challenges or no disappointments. But the good things of God are always there. And he wants us to receive those things. Even when we're struggling with ourselves. And so in that way, in your contribution, and that is the thing that I think for all of us that we can receive, is that there's no really way to know how important or how insignificant our contribution might be. We just have no way to know. There's really only one judge of that. And that's the guy who's in charge. And I thought I'll just add this one thought that I felt like tied into this, and that in being and hearing a military cadet's address yesterday, I thought it was I really kind of connected with one aspect of what was being presented about this idea of it's kind of a mantra, I guess, in this branch of the military, but it was mission first, people always. Am I getting that right? Okay, mission first, people always. And in that aspect, what was being portrayed was, we have a mission, we have something that we're set out to do, But there's a tension that goes with that people should always come first. They should always be considered. And the idea was that while you focus on your mission and those that you're interacting with around you, that there's a responsibility there, but yet then there's also a responsibility to govern yourself. And that's where sometimes it becomes challenging to look at the things around us and to push back the things that we can't control and the challenges that we feel, and to latch on to those things that are good. And in doing so, that's where we really begin to be an inspiration to others. Because what you're experiencing and you're going through, it's a common human element of self-doubt. And so I just, with the things I've been thinking and experiencing that, and then the things that you were saying, Kevin, it felt like maybe that was a place to tie in. Thank you.